Ladies and gentlemen, call to order, all rise.
Well, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you to our very special guests here in the gallery. Thank you for joining us. I want to just acknowledge, before we begin the meeting, something that I committed to at a committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, and that is that the City of London is extremely committed to making every effort to providing supportive devices, communication supports, and adaptive technologies to those in attendance at council and standing committee meetings should they be requested. Please contact the City Specialist 1 Municipal Policy AODA with respect to any accommodations required for a council or standing committee meeting or other city services at 519-661-2489 extension 2425 or cdasilva@london.ca. If you have any trouble with that, please contact mayor@london.ca. I'd be happy to help you make that connection as well. This afternoon, we will be providing communication access real-time translation. It's called CART for the first time on the agenda. This technology involves a real-time transcription of the discussion. It's going to be displayed on one of the screens that you see before us here. And to assist in providing the CART captioning, it would be helpful if each speaker's name is clearly stated prior to speaking. So, council colleagues, I'll endeavor to be very clear about who's speaking when I acknowledge you, so don't feel the need to speak your name. But when we are working in committee, we'll ask members of public to do that as well. And as a reminder, please speak slowly. Do not reposition your microphones. They are designed to pick up your voices from the position that they are placed prior to a meeting. It's also important not to turn your head away from the microphones when you're speaking. Thanks everyone for your consideration as we work our way through this new technology. I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to the 9th report of the Community and Protective Services Committee on items 4 and 5, those items pertain to funding agreements with the province for the early on funding. My wife is an employee of Child Reach, which receives employee on funding, which is a transfer from the city.
Anyone else? Councillor Zafin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and declaring a pecuniary interest on the 10th report of the Planning and Environment Committee, item number 5 or 2.4 relating to 1635 Commissioners Road East and 2624 Jackson Road as this relates to property which my family owns. Thanks.
Colleagues, anyone else? Okay. If you could please then join me, staff and people in attendance, to rise for the singing of the national anthem. Well, colleagues, tonight is the night we get to celebrate the amazing City of London employees who work around the clock to deliver on all of our priorities for this community. We recognize and celebrate their contributions to our city and to our workplace through the annual Awards of Excellence program. First, I might invite the city manager to join me. This is the City Manager's Award for Collaboration, which goes to a person or team that has shown exceptional teamwork and collaboration across our service areas and with partners in the London community. Welcome back from vacation, Martin.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you back. This award goes to Operation Foxtrot. Suspense? Are people coming out? Operation Foxtrot was a full-scale emergency field exercise involving over 20 different community agencies and departments and city service areas. It involved over 500 people at multiple locations across London. It tested our collective ability to respond to a major weather event. In this case, it was a tornado, well, a series of tornadoes. This has never been done in London before, and it further prepares us to deal with any situation with the focus on protecting lives, property, and the environment. So, on behalf of City Council, on behalf of the entire City of London, thank you to everyone involved for their dedication and for helping to keep London safe. And let's invite people out here. I'm going to read some names, or Clerk Saunders, did you intend to do that? Well, why don't you go ahead and we'll invite people out person by person.
Henry Klausnitzer. Andre Luc Beauregard. Corey Woods. Steve Beasley. Mike Bushby. Kevin Dickens. Dave O'Brien. Ashley Ramalou.
Thank you.
John Simon. London Police Service. Ambulance Communications Center. St. Joseph's Healthcare London. Fanshawe College.
Thank you.
London Transit Commission. And unable to attend is the Salvation Army. As well as John Freeman, Rick Pedlow, John Parsons, Middlesex London Paramedic Services, London Hydro, London Health Science Center, and Middlesex London Health Unit.
And thank you to everyone who was here today, everyone who was a part of that event, over 500 strong. It really was incredible. We practice every single year for an emergency response type of drill. It's extremely serious. This past year was one of the most sophisticated responses that I've ever seen. We had partners from, of course, Fanshawe College provided hundreds of volunteers who acted as victims. We had people from all of our emergency services, including paramedics, firefighters, police service. We had partners from our college, from our university, from our hospitals, all taking part in this. London Hydro as well. It was extremely authentic, and there was a triage that occurred at each of the sites. London Transit moved people to the hospitals. There was another triage drill at each of the hospitals, moving victims through each step of the way, including and up to surgery, to deal with surgeons for the response that would be required. And I can tell you, London, we were very serious about this, and we are as ready as we possibly can be for any kind of emergency. And it's because of so many, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dedicated people in our community who are here to serve London. So again, a round of applause for everyone involved in that exercise. And next up is the Live Healthy, Work Healthy Award. It's given to a person or team that is committed to a healthy workplace, a healthy balance between work, life, and wellness. The Live Healthy, Work Healthy Award for 2017 goes to Janine Bevan. Is Janine here? Welcome. Please join me. Welcome. Thank you for being here. In 2017, Janine created a news. Look at this, Janine. They wrote Janine and then Janine in case I couldn't pronounce it. So that's good. Janine created a newsletter for the Fire Communication Division that helped inspire her coworkers to adopt a healthy lifestyle both inside and outside of work. And most recently, Janine organized a challenge for the division to encourage healthy eating. Thank you for the positive attitude you bring to Fire Communications, to the entire team, and the inspiration you give us all. Put your hands together for Janine, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next, the Living Our Mission Award is awarded to a person or team that represents the City of London's mission to be at your service, a respected and inspired public service partner, building a better city for all. The Living Our Mission Award for 2017 goes to Adam Clark, Trevor Johnson, Christopher Lynch, and John Schweitzer. Join me here. Thank you for being here. Great to see you. So these four employees have been involved in a few situations where they quite literally have saved lives. In February of 2017, Trevor and Adam were in the Byron area when a man in his 90s fell in his driveway and broke his hip while getting his garbage. Trevor and Adam ran to his aid. They helped him while someone else called 911 for an ambulance. On a separate occasion, Chris and John noticed that a man had fallen and was laying in his driveway. Chris and John rushed over, helped the man to his feet, and helped him get back to his house. They made sure that he was okay before they carried on with their work. And more recently, and you'll all recall this, while Chris and John were on their collection route, a resident slipped and fell and hit his head on the route. Chris and John called 911 and they did CPR until an ambulance arrived. I can tell you that on behalf of City Council, personally on behalf of me, we can't thank you enough for helping others in their time of need. When you go above and beyond like this, your entire city is so proud of you and so thankful for you. Please, everyone, join me in thanking these incredible Londoners. Thank you. Great work. Adam Clark wasn't able to join us tonight, but we'll be sure to thank him individually. Next up is the City of London Volunteer Award. This is given to a person or team who extends the city's commitment to service through exemplary volunteering in our community. And the Volunteer Award for this year goes to Henry Klausnitzer. Welcome back. Henry is an employee with the Corporate Security and Emergency Management Team. He's recognized for his 15 years of service as a founding member of the London Search and Rescue Team. The creation of the London Search and Rescue Organization has formed a group of dedicated volunteers who have assisted our police services on countless searches, giving thousands of hours searching in all types of weather, day and night. Henry, thank you so much on behalf of the City of London for your hard work and for your dedication and for putting others before you. Thank you very much.
Thanks again. And our team thanks you too.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
And I have to say also, a very sincere congratulations on behalf of the entire City Council to the other 94 other employees who were nominated by their peers for the 2017 Awards of Excellence. Our employees are many thousand strong. They could have chosen any career. They've chosen to serve the citizens of London, and so many of them stand out each and every day for their incredible service to this community. So let's put our hands together for them. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, we'll work our way through the agenda. This is the review of confidential matters to be considered in public. There are none. And so we'll look. Councillor Usher, you did mention to me prior to the meeting you wanted to speak, so I'm going to go to you right now.
I don't think you forget. I think you just wanted to ignore me a little bit. Just kidding. I have two announcements I'd like to make, Your Worship. One is something that I do on a yearly basis at this time of the year. It's close to Father's Day. Most of you know that I'm an 18-year prostate cancer survivor, and I support the cause very, very much, and I know that many people in this room do the same. And this Father's Day, I'll be walking for prostate cancer research, and I know that some of the people here like to support me or like to walk with me, so I'm just offering the opportunity to do one or the other. This is something that is very, very dear. 1 in 6 men in Canada will have prostate cancer throughout their lifetime, and 20% of them will die from it. And we'd like to reduce that as much as possible. Some of you know that I've written a book on this subject, and I'm going to spend the first year of my relaxation time revising that book and bringing it up to date. So I wanted to share that with you, and if anybody wants to talk to me about this during the break or at the end of the meeting, please feel free to do so, or over the next couple of days. My other announcement, Mr. Chair, is that many of us from this horseshoe attended the FCM conference last weekend. And it was one of the best FCM conferences that I've attended. Perhaps it's because I was so free to do what I wanted to do on my own time. But I was very, very proud to support one of our councillor colleagues who run for the board of directors. I wanted to pass the baton on to him after serving on the board myself a number of years. And I'd like to announce now here that Councillor Josh Morgan was elected to the new board of directors of Federation of Canadian Municipalities, taking effect last week Sunday. And I think we should congratulate him because I'm very proud of this council and I'm very proud of Josh and I'm very proud of the people who were there who supported him. So, Josh Morgan.
Thank you, Councillor Usher, for both of those announcements. I'll go to Councillor Morgan.
Yes, let me say thank you to Councillor Usher for his kind words and to the other council colleagues who supported our bid to have a seat on the board. And really, it's council's seat on the board, and I look forward to serving this council in that capacity. I will say at the FCM conference, there was also a section of the agenda where they honored members for long and committed service to the organization. And Councillor Usher was one who was recognized by the entire FCM in front of the whole membership for his long service and committed service and the commitments and service that he's given that organization over the many years. Councillor Usher has served on pretty much, I think, every committee and made significant inroads and contributions to the FCM, which we all know has made significant gains, particularly in the most recent and the previous federal budgets. Those investments are through the work of the FCM and our colleague, Councillor Usher, on that board over the years. And certainly the FCM recognized his long service, and I think this council should recognize his long and dedicated service to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities as well. So thank you, Councillor Usher.
Absolutely, and I think people need to recognize when a councillor represents our community right across the entire country for the many, many, many years that Councillor Usher did, that it's sacrifice away from home, away from his constituents. And when you travel to Halifax or when you travel to Vancouver, there were no votes there. You're doing this for London, and we very much appreciate your service. Thank you very much, Councillor Usher, for all the work that you have done. Any other speakers before I look for a motion to go into closed session? Okay, I see none. So we'll look for a motion then to go into closed session. We will be in closed session for the matters that are outlined on the public agenda. We will be meeting in committee room 3. We'll be there no longer than until 5:15. Perhaps a little bit shorter. I see that moved by Councillor Ridley, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Any discussion? Okay, we'll look for that to come up on screen. We'll call the question. We're voting.
Councillor Slee. Councillor Park. Safety, sorry. Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Okay, so again, we'll be meeting in committee room 3 for those attending, especially the younger members attending with their mom. We won't be any longer than 5:15, maybe a little bit shorter than that. So just hang on. I know you're dying to get home to do your homework, and we'll get you there as quickly as we possibly can.
Ladies and gentlemen, call to order, all rise.
Okay, colleagues, well within the usher principle of the 5:15 cutoff. Here we go on item 5. This is confirmation and signing of the minutes. This is the 11th meeting held on May 22nd, 2018. Moved by Mr. Helmer, seconded by Mr. Zafman. Any discussion? Let's call the question. We are voting.
Counselor Van Holst? Minutes? Voting on the minutes?
I vote yea, thank you.
Thank you.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
And communications and petitions. We have 6.1 and 6.2. Let's refer those to the appropriate clauses of the Community and Protective Services Committee. We'll look for a mover and a seconder. Any discussion? Moved by Councilor Armstrong, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Thank you. And Councilor Morgan.
Yes, Your Worship. In one of these letters, at the end, it refers to members of our park staff as running around acting like Gestapo agents, which I don't think is an appropriate use of a term when they're trying to make a point. And although we can refer this to the clause, and there are some legitimate concerns outlined in the letter, I wanted to point out that I certainly don't find some of the language being used in these letters acceptable from time to time, and I think it's upon us to start calling it out when we see it, because the references to our staff in that way is not appropriate.
Thank you very much for doing that, Councillor. I think your colleagues would share the concern, and we will refer this matter, but recognizing that that kind of language is just completely inappropriate when it is directed towards City of London staff who are doing an exceptional job every single day. I know I had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Stafford about that during our pre-meeting, and I'm sure he appreciates your comments. Any other speakers? Okay, let's call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-1.
Okay, so motions of which notice is given, there are none, so we'll move to reports. This is the 9th report of the Community and Protective Services Committee. We'll go to the chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I have a request to pull from the City Council agenda, item 4 and item 5. One member has noted that he has a pecuniary interest. And also, I've had a request to pull item 7 and item 12 and 11. 9?
Okay, so let's move the balance of the report with the exception of 4, 5, 7, 11, and 12.
Yeah, and I have a couple of comments on some of the items that haven't been pulled, if that's okay?
We'll certainly pause then to deal with that. So if Ms. Westlake Power, you could put a motion forward on behalf of the chair, the entire report with the exception of 4, 5, 7, 11, and 12.
Just comment on it. Yeah.
Let's just get the motion out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your worship, do I have to wait for the motion, or do you want me to, I just wanted to talk about some of the
Yeah, let's work
highlights
our
from
way
the
through the
report.
speakers list. If you want to go first, we'll go to Councillor Squire second. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to comment on item number 2 on the council agenda, which is 2.2 in the report, the renaming of the Vimy Ridge Park. What staff came back to us with was basically an update on the process that we started last year. And we asked staff to complete some stakeholder consultation, and staff have reached out to the Vimy branch of the Royal Canadian Legion for assistance in that. And what they came back to us with at committee was draft evaluation criteria of the different sites that are being considered, and they'll continue to work with the Vimy branch of the Royal Canadian Legion. They expect to report back next fall with timing and costing of what the new park will be. I just don't want to speak about the things that are being pulled. So finally, 3.2, which is number 8 on the council agenda, the 5th report of the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. There was a request from the committee to make changes to the animal control bylaw, and the committee referred that back to staff to consider some of the changes that were requested by the advisory committee. And 3.4 on the report, which is number 10 on the council agenda, the London for All, a roadmap to end poverty update. We had Roxanne Riddell from United Way as the project manager here to update us all on the good things that are happening. Over 25% of the recommendations have been completed. Many of them are on track, and progress is being made. A really important item that was noted at the committee was that I believe it's over 1/3 of the participants, volunteers that are working at the accountability tables, working on implementing these recommendations, are people who are currently experiencing poverty or who have experienced poverty in their lifetime. And that's a very important voice that we wanted at the table, and the United Way and Roxanne Riddell is doing a really good job at that. So those are my comments.
Councillor Squire.
I just wanted to comment on the item with regard to naloxone. Naloxone. Is that good? I'm really pleased with this because, as you know, this came from medical students at Western University. It was their idea. It was their work. They did all of the background. They met with council members. And I said to them at the beginning of the process, I said, you know, you've got to do this yourselves. You know, don't ask a council member to step in for you, particularly me. You know, do it yourself and make the presentation. And they've done it. They've moved it along this far. We'll see where it goes to. But I'm really proud of the work they did, the involvement. And this is their second go-around. They were here last year and they weren't successful. And it's great to see young people in London who say, you know what, it didn't work out the first time, but we're going to come back and we're going to get something done. So I'm really, really pleased to see this moving forward. And I want to congratulate them, the medical students at Schulich School of Medicine, for the work they've done.
Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to comment briefly on item number, I think it's 15, which is related to the public nuisance item, which was discussed at the Community Protective Services Committee. I am fine with moving ahead on potential draft bylaw amendments, but I'll be very curious to see what is brought back, specifically the legal companion report, because I think this could be a very slippery slope area for our council to get into. We certainly have a policy on the books under the parks and under the parks bylaw, which could potentially be utilized in the public nuisance aspect. But, you know, when we're doing this because we're trying to stop certain actions from taking place by certain individuals, it can certainly have very different effects on others in the community as well. And so I think we need to keep that in consideration as we're going forward with this, and looking forward to see that report, because I think we'll be in for a discussion at that point. Thanks.
Councillor Park.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to speak briefly on the naloxone kits also, and as a joint library board member of council, wanted to say that the word has traveled to the London Public Library and they will be looking at implementing the same strategy based on the same advocacy. So I won't regurgitate what Councillor Squire had said, but those students have done exceptional work and I know that they're not done yet. I did want to also speak on point number 15. I think that this is a very important step forward for our city to talk about what's happening in our downtown and how some people are being treated on our sidewalks. There's a lot of women and young girls in our community and also visitors to our community who have been treated in such a way that this is why this conversation has to happen here. So look forward to seeing what kind of policy changes can come back, and we'll certainly have a very robust conversation about that going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Worship. I too wanted to speak with respect to naloxone kits. Throughout my career, I've been pretty involved with resuscitation in general, whether it's been as a paramedic or my work at the Middlesex London Health Unit. Naloxone's a pretty interesting drug. It has the potential to do some really good things, and just in the past couple of years alone, there have been numerous reversals of overdose and opiate poisonings and toxicity throughout our city. Those are really important to keep in mind because those are lives that were saved. One thing that I'd like to say is with, I think Councillor Helmer talked about a couple of the other sides of naloxone too. The drug itself is not so much a concern. The concern is the way people might think that this is the answer for everything. So by the risk is that if someone were to just give the naloxone shot on its own and then not do any other care, not do any other support, that if it wasn't an opiate overdose, then they're not receiving the care and the first aid that they need. So one of the things that I just wanted to highlight that more than anything is that with placement of naloxone really is important that education and understanding of first aid principles, calling 911, providing CPR and compressions, not just giving the administration of naloxone and stepping back, that care needs to keep going. In whatever the circumstance. The other is perhaps the risk to the responder as well. When naloxone is administered, if it is an opiate overdose, what it could do is create an instant withdrawal situation where somebody now having an opiate agonist becomes rather aggressive. So keeping personal safety in mind and keeping first aid principles in mind at the forefront when coupled with naloxone, those are life-saving treatments, and those are really important. So I do commend the medical students for bringing this forward. I look forward to seeing what comes back to council with respect to policy, and I think it can do a lot of good if we're really keeping people in mind. How do we help people across the city in whatever medical emergency they're in?
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Other speakers? Okay, let me just say before I call the question from the chair, we have with us Roxanne Riddle, Sarah Middleton, and of course Kelly Ziegner, the CEO of United Way. They're here for the 3.4 London for All, a roadmap to end poverty update. Thank you so much for your work. It's been an incredible year. Many milestones have been achieved because of your leadership, because of the people who are sitting around the table from the entire community who are focused on this very important issue. And I know that all of us appreciate you being here on this beautiful, almost summer's evening to see this pass as well. So thank you. And Sarah, to your kids, you guys are welcome to stay the entire night. We could go to 11. Just tell your mom you want to stay. I'm sure she says it's fine. Okay, let's call the question then on all of these items. We're voting.
Councillor Safin? Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I believe Councillor Turner has declared an interest on items 4 and 5 on the council report, or clauses 2.4 and 2.5 on the committee report. I don't know if we want to move those together.
I think we'll move those together unless there are any objections.
And I have a comment on item 2.4. I just wanted to let council know that this is another good news story coming from Ms. Livingston's area. It is about access. It's called the Licensed Childcare Affordability Pilot, and it's about increasing access and early years to childcare and early years programming for children ages 0 to 4. It's one-time expansion funding. It will allow for increased subsidies and more affordability for all children in this age group for London and Middlesex. And so for the years 2017 and 18, the total allocation for London and Middlesex is $11.2 million. So it's very good news for, as part of the London for All report as well, about increasing access to quality childcare. And this is licensed childcare in home and in institution-based childcare as well.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to rise on this because it connects into an event that I'll be attending on behalf of council tomorrow night. And many may not be aware, but tomorrow CAS is celebrating their 125th anniversary. And what's significant about that, as I read and reviewed the material, is it was the mayor, Edmund Meredith, who led the initiative to form CAS as we know it today. Now, the terminology was different. It was about the prevention of cruelty to children, but it has always been the role of city council in this community to look out for the children of our community. And so I'm pleased to see these initiatives come forward, and I wanted to place it in the context of probably one of the oldest nonprofit charities. And you know, Councillor Ridley was an employee there at one time, and in our community. But we carry on that legacy some 125 years later.
Thank you. Other speakers? Okay. Let's call the question. 2.4 and 2.5.
Councillor Ridley? Closing the vote, the motion carries 13 with 1 recused.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'll put item 7, which is item clause 3.1 from the committee report on the floor, and Councillor Squire asked for that to be pulled.
Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am a member of that committee. Unfortunately, I was away last week and was unable to attend, although while I was flying to Halifax, somebody sent me a text saying I was missing a really interesting meeting, but wasn't much I can do. I've reviewed all the various events, and the presentation included. And I want to first say that obviously accessibility is hugely important. We have huge legal obligations with regard to accessibility that we have to meet. And if anyone is ever aggrieved in terms of our response to accessibility, they should seek redress for that. There's absolutely no question about that. However, what I'm seeing in terms of the motion before us is not something that I can support, and I'll try to indicate how or why that's an issue for me in terms of my involvement with the London Transit Commission. So what appears to be happening is that, first of all, that a meeting is to take place between the mayor and members of council, who are then to report back to the Community and Protective Services Committee. I'm not sure how that can occur. Is that a meeting between the all members of council in this particular advisory committee? What exactly is it? And if it's a private meeting, we're going to have issues with that with regard to holding a meeting in camera on public matters. So I think the details of that meeting, what it looks like, what it is, and what it's going to do, has to be more detailed than is set out in this motion, because all it says now is it says the mayor and members of council. It doesn't even say the council as a whole. is going to meet with the committee. So I think until that is fleshed out, I wouldn't be able to support that. B1 is also an issue that I know will cause difficulties. And just to understand it in the context of what the motion says that the committee and then council is endorsing the top asks in each of the 3 identified areas by the accessibility committee. So what we're basically saying is, listen, we're approving the top 3 asks from each category that you got from your public sessions. Now, approval means a declaration of, endorsement means a declaration of public approval or support. So what in fact we're saying is, we're approving these things. We're approving them. They're gonna happen. Council says they're gonna happen. And the reason I stress that is because it then goes on and says, well, that meeting that's gonna take place is just gonna talk about the implementation of these issues. So what we're doing, and my concern is the council would be going ahead and saying, you know what? We're gonna approve this list of things. We don't know how much they're gonna cost. We don't know if we can do them, but we're gonna approve them. And we've never done that before. I've never seen that before, and that's gonna cause all kinds of problems. Now, just to put it in the context of the LTC, which is the board I sit on, the LTC has its own accessibility committee that meets and reports to the LTC on a regular basis and provides us with information in the transit-related context of what we should be doing in terms of accessibility. I'm not even sure that we have jurisdiction, and certainly the Accessibility Committee has any jurisdiction in regard to directing London Transit what to do. So my concern is, this committee, and I know from talking to the general manager of LTC, I went through the list with her today and I said, well, here's the 3 things that council said they endorse. Well, she said, well, I don't understand 2 of them. I'm not sure we can even do them. I have no idea what the cost is. What I would like to see, and I think you know what I'm saying, what I'd like to see is that if we're going to have a discussion, we should be having a discussion with this council. If the committee wants to come to us and say, look, here's the areas we're concerned about and we'd like you to do something about them, let's have that meeting. But to pre-approve a bunch of things that we may or not be able to do with the cost is not something that we can do. Now, if council wants to do that, that's fine. I won't sign on to that because I think this is going to lead down a road to more disappointment. I think what you're going to find is some of these things are never going to get implemented for budget reasons or other reasons. And the Accessibility Advisory Committee is going to come back to us again and say, you let us down again. You didn't do the things you said you were going to do. What I would prefer is let's figure out what we can do. Let's figure out where we can improve. Let's actually do those things. I know it was a raucous meeting. I know there was issues. I know there was threats of resignation. I get all of that. But we have to act in a responsible manner to move the manner of accessibility forward. My suggestion would be that we hash out the terms of the meeting. It should be with the entire council and the mayor. Let's find out what they have to say, and let's move on from there. But I can't just say, well, we're going to endorse a group of things that we haven't even looked at yet. So if there's going to be a discussion, let's refer the top asks to that discussion, and let's move forward. But I can't go ahead and approve these things today.
Any other speakers? Councillor Asher, Councillor Zafman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I read this report and I was a little disappointed in it in many instances. First of all, I want to say that I fully agree with what Councillor Squire just said in every respect. I don't like the tone of what I read here, and I feel disappointed in it. I was not at the meeting. If I was here, I would have gone to the meeting, but I just feel that I'm being held hostage because of what the resignation part about it. I have been around here for a long time, and I've been a member of advisory committees before I became a city councillor. And one of the things that I always recognized is that as an advisory committee, I do not expect council to adopt everything that we recommend. I do recognize that some of them are essential, and that's one of the reasons why we have the advisory committees. But I feel that council look at each, at least from my perspective in the 18 years that I've been here, we always look at each item and we decide which ones we can accept. And in most cases, we accept most of the recommendations that we get from advisory committees. And I'm talking about advisory committees in general. And when I read this report, they pointed out a lot of things that apparently we did not agree on or we did not accept from the advisory committees. I don't remember those specific items, But if they are, I would think that there is an opportunity for them to come back to us. And again, I'm going to speak in general, because this goes for any advisory committees. If one advisory committee can say this to us, any advisory committees could say this to us. If we agree to do something, it might just be a matter of timeline. When I read this, some of these items, they're not something that we can jump on and fix the next day. And there are timelines. Even the provincial government, when they come out with the AODA principles, they gave us different times, up to 2022 for some and 2025 for some items. I'm not saying any of these items are items that should go out that far. What I'm trying to say is that if they're there and we agree to them, perhaps all we need to do is to put a timeline on them. So I think we need to have another look at this rather than just bringing this to council and say, endorsing it. You talking about the word endorse, I was always of the opinion that when we use the word endorse, we're not approving. We're saying, yeah, we agree, but it's out of second hand. We do that all the time, but we don't really mean approve. And I don't like it because in this particular case, do we mean agreeing in principle or do we mean approving it? So I think that this needs to have another look, and I really would like to request, and I speak sincerely about this because I have, part of my family have people with disability, and I'm not going to speak against people with disability in any way whatsoever, but there are certain things that we can have and certain things that we cannot have, and there are reasons for some of these things. All we have to do is to be able to explain those items. Just because it's an ask doesn't necessarily mean we have to give. But in many cases, whenever it's an ask, we have a good look at it, and if we can, we will. We've always done it that way. So those are my opinion, and for that reasons, I cannot support this item, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Councillor Zaitman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to follow up on some of the questions or concerns that Councillor Squire raised. I was just hoping that potentially the clerks could maybe address some of those concerns regarding the meeting that the mayor may have and how many or which councillors may be involved in that. Just looking for some clarification there.
I can answer that. If you didn't have an opportunity to attend the meeting or review the video that's published publicly, we had a very serious situation on our hands at committee, and an entire advisory committee was looking to resign unless they could find some sort of satisfaction. And the olive branch, if you will, that was extended was an initial meeting to see if steps could be taken to eliminate their decision to resign. And that's what was agreed to. And so obviously there would be no quorum of any committee. There would be no issue connected to the Municipal Act, but what was agreed upon mutually by the committee and by the advisory committee, that there would be a meeting that would be held, an initial meeting where conversation could occur about next steps. And that's it. And I think that it was an important conversation that took place over a series of hours at committee. And any council member who wants to attend that, notwithstanding the fact that we have quorum to consider, would be welcome to attend. But to speak on behalf of the advisory committee, they were very open to that. And that's where the conversation ended.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and certainly I understand the circumstances that led to it, but I think it's still important that we're asking these questions, just making sure that we're following the right processes. So it leaves it somewhat vague and open that any member of council could attend. So I understand that, yeah, we have to be cautious of quorum, but that would then be upon us. And it might be a disincentive to some members of council if people are trying to attend but don't want to interrupt quorum. So I don't know if it's something that maybe just the mayor wants to do, if that makes things simpler, I don't know. And then just going down the list, I just wanted to ask, and again, I didn't get to the specifics around some of the asks that were in this request, but specifically around the, charging for scooters and, I'm just trying to find the wording here. Or designated scooter wheelchair charging stations in any new municipal buildings. Did staff comment on that at the meeting itself?
Again, I'm happy to answer that question unless the committee chair wants to address that. There really wasn't any comment. I mean, the advisory committee indicated that these are the priorities that were established during their public consultation. They recognized that some were medium term, some may be short term, some were very much long term, but it was the framework of the conversation. And then the bulk of our conversation was based on their interest in resigning in their entirety based on their frustration around council not listening to their advice.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm good.
Other speakers, I have Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was at the meeting. I'm vice chair of that committee. And I think that you framed the context of the discussion well for our colleagues who are reading the document and didn't have the opportunity to watch the meeting. I think there was significant concerns that were brought forward to us by members of our advisory committee. And the message I heard is that they're not feeling heard, they're not feeling respected, and they're not feeling like they're getting their message across. But I also understand what I'm hearing from my colleagues who weren't able to be present at the meeting is that the language that we're using in our report perhaps doesn't accurately convey what council wishes to do. And so I'm going to recommend a couple of amendments to the motion that committee put forward, which I hope is still going to meet the intent of the discussion and the committee and help our colleagues to be more comfortable. I think that a meeting needs to happen. I think that the committee has very clear frustrations, and the mayor asserted himself to say that he would be prepared to host that meeting. So I think we can strike members of council, direct it to the mayor, and then he could perhaps invite people, but that way it's not an official meeting of council or committee. But somebody needs to have a sit-down personal conversation with the members of this advisory committee to make sure that they're heard. This forum for our committee members who are presenting is not the easiest way to make sure that they're able to express themselves. And that's what we were trying to achieve. And so that's going to be my first recommendation, is that we strike out members of council and members of council to discuss the concerns. So on page 3 of the minutes, part A, the mayor be requested to organize an initial meeting with representatives of the Accessibility Advisory Committee to discuss. The second thing, and I think we had a lot of emotions and a lot of empathy happening at the meeting. And so what we heard from our committee was there are some significant things that we need to talk about. And what we as a committee said is we are interested in having that discussion, and that's the top ask. I think that for the benefit of my colleagues who weren't there, I would be prepared to put forward an amendment to change B section I to be received. And not received in that we're not actioning it, but that we're receiving this information. It's going to go to that discussion that the mayor is hosting, and he is going to be charged with coming back. And we did talk about at committee that some of these aren't changes that we can endorse and change. We talked about the fact that they would have to go through the regular processes such as budget and other things. And so I think if we as a committee can, or as a council can receive that information and direct it to the conversation that the mayor is going to host, he is still committed to coming back to the appropriate committee within 30 days to express and advocate on behalf of the committee and share his discussions. So those two amendments I'll put forward either individually or together. I'll look to you for that.
I'll look for a seconder for both of those amendments. Essentially, it would be that, and really, colleagues, if you weren't part of the discussion, the intention was just to open this up as broadly as we could, that it wouldn't just be through the mayor's office, that if councillors within the context of the Municipal Act could attend, would be able to, and that opportunity still is available. We're not going to break any sort of quorum issues. So the amendment is that it would be the mayor would convene the meeting, and then instead of endorsed, it would be received and referred. And so these recommendations would be received referred to these discussions, and I'll bring them back with the advisory committee within 30 days. I can also let you know that this has been, the meeting has been tentatively scheduled already, and I know that members of the advisory committee are looking forward to attending. So is that a second from Councillor Turner? Okay, so both of those amendments are on the floor. I have, in terms of speakers, I have Councillor Turner and Park on the amendment or the main motion. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you both to Councillors Squire and Ridley. Councillor Squire, through you, Your Worship, I recognize that it's challenging to bring something like this forward and saying there's challenges with what's on the paper here, and I recognize those as well. When I read through the top asks list, there's a lot that's outside of our locus of control and becomes very difficult. It's hard for us to understand what the implications of some of those in the asks are as well. A lot of them, all of them are very well intended and very solid recommendations. The question is, can we do them? So for us to endorse them, we need to know. And so it's quite appropriate, and I thank Councillor Ridley for making the amendments that I was thinking that needed to be made in order to land this in the right way. I do recognize changing from be endorsed to be referred or received and referred seems to lack the weight that endorsement has right at its moment. I think the clause in there to bring stuff back within 30 days really helps to show that we're actioning on it. And so so I appreciate those. I do support it. That's why I wanted to rise on it. And before I even got to talk to it, a motion was made that I think is quite appropriate here.
Councillor Park?
Thank you. In the interest of speaking once, I'd speak to the amendment and the main motion. I think that a lot of good quality work had happened at the advisory committee. I don't talk often about my work as a PSW, but I did that for over a decade. And I had one client. He was a miraculous human being. He was a quadriplegic, and he would use his chair to travel 15 kilometers a day. He had charging stations at friends' houses. He would go from Wooler to Trenton. And if anybody's been in Quinte West, it's a very hilly, rocky community. Without those friends of his that would have the charging stations, he wouldn't be able to do what he wanted to do in a day. I see that the things going forward here are reasonable and they're aspirational, and there's something that this council can certainly do. I think that the amendments that Councillor Ridley has brought forward are exceptional. I think that they're going to get us to a good working position on this. And I think when any advisory committee gives their input, a lot of the time it seems like that input goes into the ether, but we need to really come back with a good quality work plan with targeted dates. And thank you to the mayor for that 30-day commitment. I'd love to be a part of that.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think at this council, the word endorsement has become my least favorite, next to the one I can't pronounce. But I think that we have gotten ourselves in trouble with that on a number of occasions by wanting to put that weight that Councillor Turner talked about into things, but it's just caused some confusion out in the public. So this is a better way to go forward. We're still doing exactly what you recommended at the committee, and I'm pleased to support this. Thanks to Councillor Ridley and Councillor Squire, and of course our advisory committee.
Councillor Squire, then Councillor Usher.
To the amendment only, since I've spoken already. I appreciate the second amendment. I will not be supporting the first amendment, and the reason is quite simple. We have a procedure and a process for dealing with advisory committees and how they report to council. They report through a committee, and then they report to council. I think we have to do one or two things. We have to either rethink that process if it's not working. In other words, if committees, advisory committees are feeling aggrieved on an ongoing basis, we have to know about it as councillors. We have to be aware of it, and we have to make the changes that are necessary to make it better. What is that? I don't know what that is, but it needs to be done. And to just do a one-off and say, well, in this particular case, we've got a group of people who are upset, possibly rightly, and the way we're going to deal with it is let them have a private meeting with one of the members of this council, and then come back and report to a committee. What's going to stop every other advisory committee saying, I want one of those private meetings? That sounds great. So I'm sorry, I appreciate the sentiment, and I'm fine with that, and if you want to pass it, but I just can't. If we're going to change the rules, let's change the rules. But other than that, I hear from committees all the time. And by the way, one of the committees that was very upset on one of the issues that the Accessibility Committee was involved in was EPAC. EPAC was at the meeting over the Medway Valley, and the chair was here, and she was very upset about how EPAC had been injected into this whole process and that they hadn't been heard. So please expect to hear from EPAC shortly to have a private meeting. I know if that sounds sarcastic, it's just as a lawyer, I just can't imagine that we're embarking on this new process.
Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Speaking about the amendment, I'm going to support the second part of the amendment, removing endorsing to receive. The other part, the previous part, do have concern for the mayor to sit down and discuss this with the committee. I'd much prefer for the committee that it reports this to sit down and chat with them rather than, and I believe that that's what Councillor Squire is saying, but I'm not a follower of Councillor Squire. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. I do agree with exactly what you're saying.
We'll deal with each of those amendments separately then.
I do have a question, if I may.
Please go ahead.
With respect to, where does that leave 4? IV, Roman 4, clause 1.1, 3.1, and 3.6 be received, it being noted that the attached presentation. Is this where the complete committee resigned? I'm trying to get a picture of that and where that stands, through you to the chair. Where do we stand with respect to the resignation of the advisory committee? That's what I'm trying to get at.
So the advisory committee had indicated that they were ready to resign, but not resigning. And so by receiving this, we're not accepting their resignation. We're acknowledging that they were looking for some kind of next steps, some kind of potentially extraordinary next steps prior to offering their resignation. So they're not resigning at this time.
Mr. Chair, can you divide this out so that we can, I'd like to vote separately on A from the rest.
Certainly, we'll deal with each amendment separately. We'll deal with first the meeting with the mayor, second instead of endorsed, received.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and then we'll deal with the main motion. I'll go to the committee chair just as we're dealing with the amendments. Go ahead. I have Councillor Morgan and Helmer and then you. Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be supportive of the second part of the amendment. I know they'll be divided. The first one, I agree, I have some concerns with. And my concern is because I don't actually know what the members of the committee want. We're kind of scoping this down into a meeting with one member of council, the mayor, and maybe they want all of us to hear what they want to say, and in which case the only option to do that would be a public meeting or referring this to a committee that involves all of council like SPPC. And so I don't know if anybody has any information on what the intent or what the members of the committee actually want, because I don't want us to make a decision and not be aware of what their expectation is, because if they want all of us to listen to the concerns, then sending them to meet with one of us that would just upset me if I were on that committee. So
I'll ask the committee chair to summarize, and again, I'll just remind everyone that these are posted meetings online, and there was extensive discussion, passionate discussion, and I would say very emotional from the committee. Committee chair.
Okay, Your Worship. So when the presentation was made, I'll just say all my comments that I plan to say, and then Councillor Helmer can go after me if that's okay. So the committee presented basically the results of their public consultation. So they held 5 public open houses across the city. It was very extensive engagement with the community that they serve. And all of council were invited to attend those open house sessions. I did attend one. As a result of those engagement sessions with the community, they brought forward a number of key recommendations to council. These were provided to council through their committee report some time ago. and the report was received. So that was one sticking point with the committee. The report was received and nothing further done. I want to, first of all, thank Councillor Ridley for the amendments that she's proposing.
Point of order, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I was in the middle of speaking. I was asking one question, and the question is, we're changing this from mayor and members of council to just one member of council, and all I want to know, I know the background, I know what has happened in the past, I've actually reviewed the committee minutes, I watched some of the video. I just want to know, do members of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, in discussing these things, want to meet with one of us, or do they want to meet with all of us?
My apologies through you,
Can you just
Your
address that
Worship.
question, Chair?
Yeah, I will, but I wanted to apologize because I thought the councillor was finished, that's all. The mayor offered, at the end of a very extensive discussion, offered to meet one-on-one on many with the committee. The committee were very appreciative and accepted that offer. It was initially the mayor to meet with the members of the committee and then added any members of council that wanted to join. The initial offer was the mayor, the committee liked that idea and accepted that offer.
And for clarity, Councillor Morgan, I extended that invitation to other members of council, recognizing the municipal act, to respect each member of council's role and possible interest in attending the meeting. Councillor Morgan, you have the floor.
Yes, so I do believe there's some issues with the first one because having a meeting with just the mayor is fine. If we want to extend that to members of council, it has to move to a public meeting. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 in that I want to respect the desires of the Accessibility Advisory Committee in meeting with the mayor, if that's, as it was described to me, their intent. Perhaps phase 2 of that is the mayor reporting back, not necessarily to the Community and Protective Services Committee, but a committee of all of council so that we can all listen and dialogue. Because it is going to be problematic to invite just members of council if there's a lot of interest from members of council and a significant number of us want to show up in being able to have some sort of dialogue without being counter to the rules. So I'm very supportive of having the discussions. I'm very supportive of participating in the discussions, but I want to make sure that we do it in a way that is going to actually be effective and lead to you know, the real discussion of the issues that the committee wants us to take action on.
Thank you. Councillor Helmer and Ridley.
I support both the amendments that Councillor Ridley has suggested. I think it makes it a little bit clearer what is happening. I don't know that the first one is necessarily required. I mean, the mayor can meet with members of the advisory committee whenever he wants. And, you know, I think it's a good thing for council to say, we support this idea. If there's a way to help figure out how this advocacy and work with the advisory committee can be more effective in the future, that's what the advisory committee wants. That's what we want. If they can meet with the mayor and figure out ways to do that more effectively, and he can report back with them to the committee that they report to, I support that. So I think that that's a fine approach, and I'll support that First Amendment. I will say, when in terms of the recommendations that are coming out of the public consultations around transit at the committee meeting, I did say, you know, these are really in the jurisdiction of the Transit Commission, and what we do here at council is not going to change the situation. It needs to be a decision made at the Transit Commission. That was discussed, and I think the advisory committee understood that issue very well. They recognize that, you know, the timeline for some of these things might be longer for the ones that are more difficult and more complicated, that not all the decisions need to happen here and they might have to happen elsewhere. And the very next day, we had a Transit Commission meeting. I mentioned that we had this discussion at the committee, and the suggestion from the general manager of LTC was we should invite the advisory committee from the city to meet with the advisory committee for the Transit Commission and have a joint meeting at the Transit Commission where we can talk about the accessibility issues that are facing people using transit. So I think that that's probably the most effective way forward there. I think that's going to be a good step. That obviously has to happen at the Transit Commission, and we can extend an invitation to the members of the advisory committee here at the city. But I think that those are the things we need to do, and I think one thing that's very clear is that what we have been doing has not been working very well. So I think trying a couple new things is probably a good idea.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. I think you said Councillor Ridley, and that's me, so here I go. Great. So I think we're going to put these forward separately, but I'll make comments that pertain to both, and then I think I need to provide the clerk with clarity, which will not substantially change the motion for the second one. So I'm going to speak to both. This is not new in terms of directing members of council or the mayor to meet with someone. 15 members of this council last year directed Councillor Cassidy, Councillor Hopkins, Deputy Mayor Hubert, and myself to meet with a committee that wanted to be heard. It was the Community and Crime Prevention Committee. And in fact, they directed it twice, because the first time nothing got set up, the committee came back and said, hey, you're still not listening. We want to direct this meeting to happen. And council passed it twice. So this is not new and it's not abnormal. What I heard from the Accessibility Advisory Committee is we want to feel heard and we need a champion. And the mayor stood up in that meeting and he said, I want to hear you and I want to be your champion. So let's sit down and talk about it. The next person that spoke stood up and said, I'll be a part of that meeting too. And so that's how it got extended. And I think that the language came across wonky, which is why I've put forward the recommended amendments that I have. I think that what the committee can hear, and there are members here of the committee today, is that I think you have a couple of people that want to be your champions. And so as bureaucratic as this sounds, I think people are, the debate and the discussion is over who's going to be a part of that and who's going to get to be a part of that. And so making this amendment is council directing the mayor to take the lead on that. And then within the constraints that we have, other people may be able to join that meeting. But I think what you can take away is there are a number of people that want to actively work on this issue. And I hope that's what you're taking away from it. So when we put forward the first amendment, it is exactly as I had indicated the first time. It is removing "and members of council." The second amendment, if people want to look on the minutes, page 4, part B1, it's changing endorsed to received. And then on the next line is for work on implementation by municipal council. That needs to be removed because that's potentially what the mayor and those that meet are going to come back with, is what is the plan, what can we implement and how can we do that? And that's reflecting the decisions that aren't within the purview of council. So that will be on the screen so it's easier for people to follow, but that is what I had shared with the clerk, and we'll put those through one at a time.
Other speakers? I'll go to the chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, thanks through you to Councillor Ridley for the clarification as well, and the reminder that, yes, we did meet with the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee at their request. And again, under similar circumstances. As well, anyone on this council can meet with anyone that we choose to, as long as there's not quorum and we're not discussing moving the business of the city along. As well, and former councils, there was a member of council that sat on each advisory committee. We don't have that anymore, and that's probably why we're having some of the issues that we're having, because there isn't that direct connection between members of council and these advisory committees. As far as the resignation that was proposed or talked about at the meeting, it wasn't a threat of resignation. This is a committee that came to us and said, these are the things that have been happening. This is the advice we've been giving you. And something as simple as a
Point of order, Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't want to interrupt. I was going to say it afterwards, but I've been here on advisory committees for over 20 years. No advisory committees ever had member, except that in the 1990s, the Race Relations Advisory Committee had a council member. I don't know of any other, maybe one or two that I'm not aware of, but not all of them in general. Just wanted to make sure we understand it.
I know from the members of the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee that members have been sitting on that since the 70s. They used to have they told us at our meeting that they had council members.
Okay, so now we're getting into, I think, point, counterpoint, and also council trivia that is well into the weeds. I can think of a couple of council members who were members of advisory committees as well, but I don't think that is germane to the discussion.
Okay, I just
So-
want to, I want to clarify the resignation issue that, and it wasn't a threat, there's
Again,
no,
we're just dealing with the two amendments at this point.
I thought I was dealing with the, like,
Let's deal with the amendments and then we'll deal with the entire motion, but if you want to speak.
I want to speak on the entire motion now. I don't want to speak again. Can I finish?
Okay, please
Can I
go ahead.
finish? Okay. This is one advisory committee amongst all of them that we must have. By law, by provincial law, we must have a committee advising us on accessibility. We must have this committee. It's different from all others. The resignation issue was the fact that many of all of the advice that they have been giving us, they felt has been swept under the carpet. And so their feeling was if they are not effective advocates for the disabled community in the city, then perhaps it's time to get new advocates that are more effective at advocating to this council. So that's what the resignation that came in there. And one example is just the simple name change on the mayor's honors list. They wanted the name change of that award. And 3 times it came through this council and it still wasn't changed. So something as simple as that was causing them frustration. So at the committee, as some people have pointed out, we did explain the process. We did explain that many of these things will not be instant fixes like the mayor's New Year's honors list award was. Some of them would take a long time. Some of them were not in our jurisdiction like LTC. And they would need to go through the budget process. So everybody was very aware of that. And given the amendments that Councillor Ridley has brought forward, I think that this is something that I have no problem supporting.
Okay. Amendment number 1, let's have that come up, please. It's been moved by Councillor Ridley and seconded by Councillor Zafman. Thank you. It's on screen. I have no additional speakers. I'll call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion, Councillor Park.
Yay? Need your mic.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-2.
Okay. And on the second amendment for this motion, instead of endorsed, we're receiving. Any speakers? Councillor Usher?
I think there were some other words in the statement too. Are we talking about that, or we?
It'll come up on screen. Yeah. Okay, if you scroll down to the bottom of your page, you'll see the second amendment. It's been moved by Councillor Ridley and again seconded by Councillor Zafman. Turner. Thank you, Councillor Turner. Any speakers? Let's call the question. Open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Okay, on the main motion.
We broke the motion in 2 parts. Why can't we just leave it like that? Why is it that we have to go back? And if you do that, then you force me to.
Councillor, it's the main motion as amended. And so we dealt with amendment A, B, and now we're dealing with the main motion. So, on the main motion as amended, moved by the chair, Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Thank you. Any speakers? Come up on screen. Okay, looks like it's, I think, up on screen if you just scroll down to the bottom of the page. Okay, up on screen now. Any speakers? Let's call the question. We are voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Point of privilege, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I rise really briefly and not to belabor anything as a point of privilege. And in the past debate, a couple of references were made to the recordings of the proceedings of that meeting being on video. We subdivide into council into subcommittees or into committees. The expectations are that we have a pretty firm handle of the committees that we sit on. We read and reference the minutes from those committees as they're reported to council, not attending every committee meeting and reviewing every meeting, whether by video or in person. It really, in essence, comes down to attending every meeting. So that's why we break down the committees, and the inference that I get from it, and perhaps that's not what it is, but the inference is that those who are not attending or watching the entire videos are not doing their jobs. So I'd like us to, I've heard that in other debates as well, so I'd like us to take some caution from that as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Chair? What are we up to next? 11?
Sorry.
3.5?
Yes, item 3.5 on the committee report, which is 11 on the council agenda, the Parks and Recreation Area bylaw amendments. Our Deputy Mayor Hubert asked for that to be pulled.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Well, it's rare that we spend this much time on a CAPS report, so I'm glad I can rise on this issue. And I will be supporting what the committee is doing because I've had conversation with staff about the needs in terms of our parks. But for a number of years, I've been talking with both bylaw enforcement staff and parks staff with respect to the feeding of wildlife on private property by individuals. And I have a number of these instances in my ward, and it's extremely problematic. And I know I would find support with my friends from the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, and I listened to their advice on these matters, and they have educated me greatly over the last decade. In fact, I referred a constituent to them once again. And just for council's information, you know, we all think feeding wildlife's a good thing. It's not. It's not good for them. It's artificial source of food. It increases the size of litters or of babies. It's detrimental to their systems because it's not the right food for them. They lose their fear of the public, which creates a situation where you get more and more road kills, you get more and more interaction between humans and the wildlife. There's a public risk involved. I have a constituent who is chasing 50-pound raccoons out of their backyard that have become so domesticated that they think it's their backyard, and they are hissing at them and trying to get into their house. Now, they can't go out in their backyard. And it has drawn skunks, it has drawn huge raccoons with multiple litters, with raccoons across the fence during the day, and all of those sorts of things. So I share that simply to create a context. And it's not very many people, but those who are doing it are adamant. They think they're doing the right thing. We've tried to educate them. So on B, and I trust the council will support this. We're asking staff to come back. It's not absolutely clear. The communication is clear because I wrote it. But that they would review the matter, and that's not good enough for me. I want them to come back with a bylaw that deals with feeding of wildlife on private property. And we're not the first municipality, by the way. Hamilton has a very good wildlife feeding bylaw, and staff's aware of it, and I'd like to see this. I've been dealing with staff on this for several years. I've got emails and correspondence going back at least 3 years. And so I'd like to see us bring this back in a timely manner. So that would be my request. I don't know that I need to get into an amendment, but I'd like to, through you, Mayor, to staff, and I think it's going to have to go to Mr. Kostovich. Welcome back from vacation. How quickly could we bring something like this back? I mean, a lot of the research has been done by your staff and Mr. Stafford's staff. How quickly could we bring it back?
And just for a point of clarification, Deputy Mayor Hubert, because this was discussed at length at committee, and in your letter that was received by committee was discussed as well. It was important from a staff perspective that we move forward with the recommendation before us, also respecting the direction that you wanted to take. And so committee, in a very respectful way, referred your letter to staff for a report back on direction that could be taken. You're asking for a bylaw, a draft bylaw to come back?
Well, here's what I'd like to suggest, if I could, that report, much of the research has been done, and to say that this is not overly complex, but that report would come back with a potential draft bylaw attached to it in a fairly timely manner.
Probably the most expedient way to deal with this is to go to Mr. Kostovich and say, what was your intention of this report if you were to come back? Would you come back with some options for council to consider, including a bylaw?
Through your worship, we would be coming back with some options for you. It could contain a bylaw. It depends on how we land on this with our research and our consultation. So, and it would probably be within a couple of months.
Okay, and I would assume that if it was to go forward, it would require another public participation meeting. Okay. Mr. Mayor, I'm happy with that response. I just don't want it to languish past the term of this council. I'd like to tie a bow on this one and be done with it. It's not one of those things that frequently happens, but unfortunately when it does happen, it's extremely problematic. And it's impacting, in fact, on Thames Valley Golf Course as well. So it has a public risk factor to it.
Other speakers? Okay, let's call the question.
Closing the vote and motion carries 14-0.
So, Your Worship, I'll put council agenda item number 12 from the sixth report of the Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Advisory Committee on the floor. It's item 4.1 on the committee report. Councillor Squire asked for that to be pulled, but I also wanted to mention that I would be moving an amendment to, so it's 4.1, item A, subsection 2, subsection A, which says the city clerk be requested to create an email account for the DIAC, directed to the DIAC secretary and the DIAC chair's email address. So the amendment would be that we refer that part, that the email account be directed to the DIAC chair's email address, that we remove that part out and refer that back to the city clerk, because there is some more work to be done on that particular thing, and maybe the city clerk could comment on that.
Okay, and I think that Ms. Westlake Power has some language on that. Is that correct? Okay. So I'll go to Councillor Squire, and then we'll deal with that amendment as well.
I was going to speak to the same area, Mr. Chair, and through you. I'm just, again, my apologies, I wasn't here for this meeting. I'm just concerned, I suppose, and if we have email accounts for people who are not elected members or members of staff, where are we going in terms of freedom of information, access to that information, responsibility for information contained on those email accounts? And I don't know if that's part of the referral, and if it is, I'd be very happy that that's occurring, because it does raise some issues from my point of view before we go ahead. So I'm seeing the clerk nodding her head, so I'm very supportive of the referral.
Okay, so let's deal with the amendment first. So it's been moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Squire. Yeah, okay. Ms. Westlake Power, do you have some language on that prepared? Great. Okay, that amendment is up, apparently. Just to refresh your screen if you can't see it. It should be at the bottom. Just wait until I can see it myself. Okay, this is on. Actually, I don't see it. I'll have to refresh again. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the amendment moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Squire. Any discussion? We'll call the question. On the amendment? No. Yep, yeah, on the amendment, that's correct, yeah. Okay, we're voting.
Councillor Morgan? Closing the vote. Councillor Squire? Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
And we'll deal with the main motion. It's been moved by the Chair, Councillor Cassidy. Speakers, Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm looking at A2. It's to do with the brochure. And I'm just wondering if this has passed through the City Clerk's office for concurrence. It sounds to me as though this is a brochure that they've used in the past. But I do have concerns about this, because I think that this committee can do a lot of work external to City Council in the community, as they used to do. And it says here that they do, but I have no indications that they do. And there are many, many organizations out in the community that would like to ensure that they're associated with them, or that they're invited to things that they have, or that they know when activities are happening. But it doesn't seem as though they're aware of those activities. So I just wonder if this brochure has been vetted by the clerk's office.
Through your worship, yes, the city clerk staff have reviewed the brochure.
Other speakers? Okay, let's deal with the main motion. As amended, we'll call the question. Seconder on that. Councillor Usher, thank you. And we'll open that vote.
Councillor Van Holst, Councillor Turner. Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. We'll move to the 12th report of the Corporate Services Committee. Chair.
Thank you. I will put all items on the floor. I'll just speak to the last one, which was the appointment to London Middlesex Housing Corporation Board of Directors. We have 3 candidates for 2 vacancies. The very qualified candidates, we're recommending Deb Peckham, who had served on the board previously and was in fact the chair of the London Middlesex Housing Corporation years ago, and Anna Maria Evans as the 2 directors to fill those vacancies on the board.
Thank you. Any speakers? Okay. Slightly shorter than caps. Tough question. We're voting.
Councillor Park and Councillor Salim. Closing the vote, and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, Chair. To the Chair of the Civic Works Committee.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's been 2 weeks since our committee meeting. I hope people have had an opportunity to review. I did not receive any information that anyone wanted anything pulled or any questions on any items. Councillor Turner did let me know that he would like to speak to some items, and on item 5.3, I voted contrary, and so I will ask the Vice Chair to put that item forward. But I will put the remaining items forward at this time.
So you're bringing all items 1 through 16 up to 5.2 forward? Okay. And Councillor Turner, did you want to speak to any of those, or did you want to speak to 5.3? Both. Okay, we'll give you 2 opportunities then. Okay, so let's go to Councillor Turner. This is on the 9th report of Civic Works, with the exception of item 17, which is clause 5.3.
Thank you, Your Worship. With the respect to item number 3, which is 2.2, the non-intrusive vehicle detection equipment, I support this result predominantly as a cyclist. The opportunity to be able to have vehicle detection equipment that's not just for vehicles but also includes cyclists is a huge plus, and I take a lot of notice of them as a cyclist whenever I get to intersections and I see the little radar boxes up on the posts. I think this makes a big difference. Often you get to intersections, especially busy ones, on your bike. My bike's carbon fiber, so it doesn't attract the induction loops at all to be able to trigger the magnet, and you just sit there and watch cars go forever, and you have to get off your bike, go over to the pedestrian signal, and so this is a good result, and I learned a lot about the technologies from the report, so I appreciate that. With respect to item 11, sorry, I think item 12 is what I meant to talk about, was with the Blue Box program and food and organic waste. The interesting information in here as well, and a little bit concerning. This comes later to speak to item 17 or 5.3, the clear garbage bags. Seeing that we're losing markets for our recyclables, and that there's going to be challenges with the end producer responsibility on packaging in terms of recovery of some of the Blue Box fund, where we could see 100% recouped. Those were some significant programs that would help us fund something like organic waste collection, for example, and very important. So I really hope to see that we move forward with those, and I am concerned about the lack of market for some of our recyclables, and it'd be really interesting to see what we can do to try and find other markets or otherwise. With respect to 13, oh, sorry. 13, Smart Moves Master Plan Transportation Accomplishments. One of the things I noted in there was the warranted sidewalk program, and a fairly significant increase in the amount of sidewalks that we've been able to achieve. And I think Councillor Helmer is to applaud for that, for bringing forward funding increases for the warranted sidewalk program, and it's quite evident in there. So again, another really good report for us to be able to see what accomplishments we have made, what areas that we can also improve upon, and I think that's something. This is a report that I think will be really good to touch back to as we make a lot of transportation decisions in the future.
Councillor Zafman and Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and apologies to the chair. I just felt the need to speak to this item today. Just speaking on the ability to pay by app for parking in the city. I know, I think Councillor Park touched on this at the meeting, I believe, and I think it's quite significant, although it may not seem on the overall budget for the city, but a saving to the taxpayers of London who might have been fined otherwise for a total sum of about $82,000, and a 16% reduction in tickets is quite significant. We won't know with certainty whether that is because of the app, but I think it's quite reasonable to state that there's certainly good reason to think that it is because of that. And being on the parking file, I guess, quite a bit since coming on to council and speaking with Ms. Drost about this quite some time, I was very excited for the potential when we talked about new modules coming in, and being able to utilize something like this app is really significant. And clearly it's putting money, or saving money, I should say, for taxpayers here in London. Thanks.
Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, with respect to item number 9, or 2.6, high-speed rail, I wonder if we should not defer this. It seems to me that we got a new government now. We have no idea what will be the situation. I would be very reluctant to start spending money to find out what are our requirements for a route through the city. It just seemed to me that now is not the time to attack it. We could pass this and ask for a deferral for it, or we could defer this, or I'm not so sure. Perhaps staff had given this some thought, and maybe they might give us some answer to this.
Ms. Scher.
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly, we don't want to speculate on the agenda of a new government. We do, however, think this study is important to move forward in order to demonstrate London's readiness to be connected by high-speed rail to the rest of southwestern Ontario. If you can look to the report, it does outline a number of questions we do wish to answer that will benefit us on a number of existing infrastructure projects and help us also lay a foundation for how we deal with railways within the City of London. That said, the risk associated with deferral is low. We could certainly come back in the fall, but my recommendation would be that we proceed given the other benefits and the need to demonstrate our commitment to this moving forward.
Okay, I will buy that. I think that staff is knowledgeable enough that they were going to pace this in appropriately. With respect to sending a letter to the Minister of Transportation, however, I'm not so sure that the time is right for this. So I'm assuming that that will be delayed accordingly until we know who the Minister of Transportation would be.
Chair.
Absolutely, thank you. I'm always happy to answer questions about committee reports that I represent, and thank you to Ms. Scher for grabbing me on the first part. I agree that it needs to wait until the new minister is named, but I think it's still important that should the province continue to move forward with that process, that London requests a seat at that table. We want to be contributing to those discussions in the benefit of all Londoners.
Thank you, Chair. Other speakers? Councillor Van Holst and Helmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, first question to our staff on item 14, 2.12, the connected autonomous vehicles technology strategy. It said in the report we're going to set up a working group, and I'm wondering if that is a working group of city councillors, like the governance working group, or some other type of group. I'm sorry, I didn't ask that question at the committee because we were...
Chair.
Thank you. It was my understanding that this was staff and not a council-led working group, and Ms. Scher is able to correct me if I'm wrong, as always.
Thank you, Councillor Ridley is correct. Plus, we would also include LTC to talk about first mile, last mile with respect to transit.
Great, thank you very much. Last week, there was a tremendous presentation at our advisory committee to the environment on, on green Baines organic food waste, and I recommend everyone have a look at that presentation. I'm sure it'll come to us at the next meeting, but some very viable ways to do that. Some of the interesting things that were said, one was that if all you're going to do is collect food, it's not worth it. But then they presented some strategies which were very much worth it, and I think London should seriously look at. So that, a very interesting piece for there. I think this item's coming up in the next cycle as well. And those are I believe those are my two comments. Oh, except for maybe the parking, I think I'm going to be using the parking app from now on. It was earlier this week. I put money in the meter, or actually used my credit card in the meter, and no ticket came out. Maybe it was out of paper, and so I wrote a little note in the car, and I got a ticket anyway, so I'm going to have to fight that one. But had I used the app, I wouldn't have ran into that trouble. So there we go. Thank you. And, maybe just one final comment to Councillor Turner. He can, if his diet was higher in iron, he might get those sensors to work when he's riding his bike.
Other speakers? Mr. Helmer.
Thank you. On high-speed rail, I think certainly the corridor protection study is a good idea. During the provincial election campaign, all the parties supported the idea of the environmental assessment, which is what's underway now. We'll see where it goes after the environmental assessment is done. Certainly, it's the issue of the budget for high-speed rail and actually building it. I think that is more of the issue. And protecting the corridor is really important. If we don't do the study and then we don't protect the corridor and then we have an issue, we're going to run into a problem. So I would support that. For the Smart Moves Transportation Master Plan, I found this report to be very helpful, just to give an overview of some of the projects that are underway on all the different modes of transportation in the city, things that have been done over the last few years. Just the summary table for the strategic road improvements, $146 million across, I don't know, maybe 10 projects all over the city, different kinds of projects for different kinds of modes of transportation, but they're not cheap. And I think it's helpful to get a summary of what has happened so far and what's in the pipeline in terms of the Transportation Master Plan. On the connected and autonomous vehicles, I think this is a good step forward. I think having a working group is a good idea. I think as Councillor Squire and others who went to the session about transit and first mile, last mile, this is an active discussion at the Transit Commission, and I think that this is part of that, and I think looping the city into the discussion in this way is a smart idea. Later after this meeting, as long as it wraps up relatively soon, I'll be leaving for Vancouver to go to the Urban Transit Association conference where we're talking about new mobility connections in between Uber and Lyft and all these different services, how they can integrate with transit. And I know that this issue around autonomous vehicles and how they're going to interact, not just the fully autonomous vehicles, which is what a lot of people think of when they talk about autonomous vehicles, but the whole spectrum of autonomy, how that's going to work. And I'm interested to hear that discussion. And I think this is a good step forward from the city's perspective.
Other speakers? There are none. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, and I'm going to go to the Vice Chair to present the last item on the agenda.
Thank you. Putting item 5.3 from the committee report, item 17, clear garbage bags, which was a motion brought through with additional business from Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Speakers? Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's an interesting recommendation, and it's actually one I wrote into a report as the chair of the Advisory Committee on the Environment back in 2007. Was one of the and the report was called Getting to 60. And with the target of getting to 60% waste diversion. One of the recommendations was consider and evaluate clear garbage bags. At this time, I'm a little uncomfortable with supporting it, and for a couple of reasons. I think it is absolutely one way to help drive to get to waste diversion to the appropriate level. I think there's a couple steps that we need to do first, and that's my concern with it. are right now, the best I could see, and I was looking around for some of our reports, but it really comes from the Roadmap 2.0, which talks about our current, the capture rates, and the capture rates in 2.0 reflect 2012. So it's still 6 years ago. Paper capture was about 85%. It was actually pretty good. The others hovered around 50%. Glass was around 75%. One of the low ones was plastics at around 31% in terms of captures from our stream. We do absolutely want to encourage and increase those numbers. A couple years ago, we had the debate about the number of garbage bags we can put at the curb. And we voted to go to 3 bags from 4 bags, but another recommendation was go to 2 bags. And driving the amount of waste that you can put into to landfill forces people to start taking a look at what they're actually putting into the bag and bring those items out. The clear bag is kind of a last step, because the other part is we haven't touched organics yet. So, and the third concern was the report that I referenced a little bit earlier, which was the fact that we're losing market for a lot of our recyclables. And so those 3 things together create a bit of concern that going to clear bags, which I've heard some privacy concerns, and I recognize there are ways to get through that and get around it. Most municipalities that do that have a privacy bag. You can put an opaque bag, one opaque bag in your clear bag, so that you've got those materials in that. But nonetheless, I see that one as if our waste reduction strategies, such as reducing the number of bags at the curb, organic waste collection, and promoting reduction of waste altogether. Reduce is the first, and when we hear reduce, reuse, recycle, it's actually a hierarchy. Reduce first, then reuse, and then recycle. So recycle is the last on that list. It's still very important, but I would like to see us move, and I think those are the really important steps that we do first before we get to this thing, if that's not successful. So I certainly recognize and appreciate the motion put forward by Councillor Hubert, and I think it's certainly appropriate to consider in the whole context of the work that we're doing on the Waste Management Working Group. And the recommendations that we're doing in concert with the environmental assessment for W12A. So perhaps, I mean, that might be my recommendation, is that it be referred into that process rather than be standalone on it.
Councillor Ridley, Deputy Mayor Hubert, Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. I did not support this at committee, so it should be no surprise that I'm standing to speak against it today. This item came forward as additional business without a lot of notice, and so I think people made decisions on the fly as to whether or not to support this to move forward. As someone who raised this myself in 2015 and said, hey, what about that? I had had conversations with our staff. I had heard what some of the concerns were. I had heard some of the things that Councillor Turner referenced earlier, saying, you know, we're not at that point yet. I don't hear Londoners asking for this at this time. I think that there's a lot more that we can do to change behavior through positive rewards rather than this type of program. So because this isn't something that I hear Londoners asking for, because I don't think we're ready to move in this direction, that we have to continue to make other changes. I'm going to urge people not to support it and to wait on it a little bit. Let us do a bit more work that we're doing through the avenues that are already out there. And if we need to come to this point to say, you know, we need to further reduce, then let's look at it then. But I think rushing it forward at this point in time, and I recognize that we're only doing a report back, but I just don't think it's the right time and it's the right thing to do. I'd much rather work through some of the other processes that we have on the go right now.
Deputy Mayor Hubert, Councillor Morgan, Councillor Van Holst.
Well, to my colleague, Councillor Turner, your genius has finally caught up with me after 11 years. So my purpose in bringing this forward was not to rush something forward, but is to make sure that this is one of the things that is considered as part of the strategy going forward. And sometimes we just need to throw an oar in the water and say, hey, this is something to consider. And the reason I brought it forward was the landfill up where my family cottage is, I made the bad mistake of having a black plastic bag. And guess who had to root out of everything out of that black, because they require a clear bag. And all of a sudden I felt, oh geez, I found a pop can in there, and I found and it made me think, and it's a social psychological phenomena where when you see things, you reconsider it. So, council, do what you wish with this. It's simply for investigation and a report back on its potential. And that report may very well say, hey, this fits into the waste reduction strategy, and that would be fine.
Councillor Morgan?
Yes, I will join a couple of my colleagues in not supporting this at this time. I do think that this is a discussion we can have with the public down the road. I will say there are some consequences to moving to clear bags. Despite what Councillor Turner said, we actually don't have a bag system currently. We have a container system, and you can put a bunch of bags in that container. So by moving to clear bags, we may need to make an adjustment to the container system, because otherwise you'd have clear bags in a container, and it might just defeat the whole purpose of having the clear bags. So I think we can have the conversation, but I would agree, let's have that in consultation with the public in a different way down the road. The same way we had the consultation with the public, which a number of people weighed in on the container limit discussion. So I'll join my colleagues in not supporting this.
Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, I might make the motion to refer this to staff rather than decide that we want them to not investigate clear bags.
Just before we enter into debate, there's a referral on the floor. Any seconder?
Yeah, my concern is that we're directing, by voting against this, we're directing staff to not look at these and at future things, whereas we can just refer this to them to investigate it as their leisure.
For a seconder.
But maybe I could have some clarification on that.
Councillor Turner's seconding that referral. Thank you. The referral does take precedent. I'll give you the floor. You've got about 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, so the presentation that I saw last week did have clear bags, but as Councillor Turner pointed out, was kind of the crowning glory of that to make sure that all the other strategies were being implemented. Some of the interesting things that went on in this strategy, it was a 2-week cycle, and there was 2 weeks, both weeks would have been organics and recyclables, and only 1 week was garbage. And it was a 4-day cycle, so the holidays were, that holiday Monday that we sometimes run into problems with was gone, so it just went from Tuesday to Friday. So everybody knew exactly what day they were going to do garbage, and that stayed very consistent, which also would be a popular thing. The other thing that they banned was textiles. So you weren't allowed to throw textiles away unless they were oily rags, but anything like one sock, one shoe, all had to go to some type of recycling, and they had made special bins for the city. All those kinds of bins were done through the city. And tremendous what happens there. I don't know if you know this, but there's a huge market for these things, even single shoes. There are countries that are very poor that will take those, and they have little factories where people match up these shoes for people, because they're hard things to get. So they'll match up sneakers, and people in poor countries will have kids will have a chance to have Nikes, which is not something they could buy. So this was an interesting strategy about it. And what they found was, besides a tremendous amount of diversion, the last thing that the clear bags did was reduce the amount of garbage altogether, which was something that they noticed. And the thought behind that is that people aren't sneaking the electronic waste and the hazardous waste into the garbage bags, because they can't do that, and they're probably just collecting in their homes until or in their garages until they take a big load to the disposal. So that, when presented, was a very comprehensive strategy, and looked like it was very valuable. In their green bin, they would also collect diapers and pet waste, including cat litter. So that was the other thing, because otherwise there just wasn't enough waste for it. But when they put all these pieces together, it seemed very, very effective, and it's also really worth listening to how they marketed the strategy, which was very significant as well. So that would be my reason for referring this. It could be part of a very effective strategy. So I'll leave it to Councilman.
Thank you. Councillor Ridley on the referral.
Thank you. I'm gonna be brief. I don't support the referral. There's a new council term in 5 months. If someone wants to bring this forward at that time, they can. It's not like you're blocking it out from staff looking at it for over a month. I think that there it continues to be a lot of misinformation actually about the environmental benefits of single shoes and socks and such. So if you're driving those to a bin, you are actually not helping the environment in any way. When you look at the environmental impact of you driving that to the donation bin. I think you have complex issues in the community of people who, if they can't dispose of items, are going to then retain the items and cause health and significant risks, as well as probably complaints from neighbors and such about the items that are being retained on their property. I don't think this is something that needs to be referred. I think it's not the right time to look at clear bags. I think that there is not a significant market for some of the items that we saw that in a report earlier, right? There is not international markets that want people's items that can't, that would show up in a clear bag, such as clothing and things like that. So it's just not the right time. I don't think people should support the referral. I think that you need to let the work that's happening continue to work and allow this to come back when the time is right, if it's still required at that time.
Councillor Turner, the seconder of the motion, looking for a point of clarification.
It's really important. You looked to me and said, is somebody seconding it? Well, let's find out. So if this referral is just a referral, and basically our referrals typically is referred to staff and then they report back to us, which is pretty much the same as be directed to investigate and report back to us, that's a nuance that I'm not really ready to second. But if the referral is to refer to staff for consideration as part of the broader strategy, period, and not have to report back, I think that's an important nuance and difference.
My interpretation of the referral was a referral to staff, period. And so no expectation of a report back unless one was required. So do you continue to second? Okay. Okay. So on the referral, any other speakers? I have, oh, sorry, Councillor Helmer.
Well, my colleagues on the Waste Management Working Group will be familiar with this kind of discussion, which is what we do at the Waste Management Working Group. And a number of my colleagues on that working group have already weighed in. And one thing I just wanted to mention, many things have been said, the 60% diversion action plan is going to be coming forward imminently. So it's been going on for a while. It's going to be reporting up the draft. This kind of thing is already being considered, right? Like, this is not a new idea that nobody knows about. This is something people bring up all the time when we go talk to them about resource recovery. We say, what do you think? And they say, we should do clear bags. Like, that's something that the public brings up regularly because they go to other places, they're in other jurisdictions, they see it happening, they think it's a good idea. So whether we pass this motion or not, I think our staff are already considering whether that's something that should be part of the strategy or not. We're going to get this report, I think, in June or July of this year. So it is underway. I guess vote accordingly.
Other speakers? Let's call the question on the referral. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion is lost. 60.
On the main motion. Speakers? There are none. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion is lost, 5-9.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Vice Chair. We will now move to the 10th report of the Planning and Environment Committee. Chair?
Your Worship, I put forward the 10th report of the Planning and Environment Committee. I would look to council to see if anything wishes to be pulled. I hear a call for 5, Your Worship.
Okay, 5. We'll deal with the remainder of the report with the exception of 5. Any speakers? Councillor Morgan, Councillor Park. I'm sorry, Councillor Park, you had indicated you wanted to speak first. I think that's what that meant. So, Councillor Park, the chair recognizes Councillor Park.
Sorry, my puppeteer skills are not very good. I just wanted to speak very briefly on 2.1, the Core Area Steering Committee. Yes, that's what I did. I think a lot of good work is done. I'm losing it because of Ms. Rowe. Thank you. A lot of good work has been done with the Core Area Steering Committee, and I would like to applaud the work of staff, and I'd like to applaud the work of business owners in the downtown that have done a lot of advocacy work to make sure that this group is focused on what needs to be focused on, and look forward to many more years of this group working together.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I wanted to comment on number 6 in the council agenda 2.5, living in neighborhoods and unassumed subdivisions. This report builds on the decision the council already made through the assessment growth policy to hire some additional staff. One of those staff is for an ambassador position that will liaise with new homeowners in unassumed subdivisions. And this report and this plan outlines the type of work that that ambassador will be doing. And this is something that those who are living in and near unassumed subdivisions have been looking for quite some time. And although this will be an ongoing strategy that will strive for continuous improvement, I certainly think we'll see some immediate improvements in the way that we integrate our communications with new homeowners, the way that we communicate, and help them navigate the very complex issue of not being sure where to go when you have an issue in a neighborhood. When a developer owns the land and not the city, many of those common questions that are very easy to go to the city on are actually to liaise with the developer. So having an ambassador in all the unassumed neighborhoods across the city to communicate with those residents who are Londoners, who are paying taxes, and assist them in the process, I think will be a great improvement, and I'm looking very forward to working with our staff to make sure that this rolls out smoothly, and kudos to them and council who has supported this, I think, unanimously all the way through, and this will be great for those Londoners in those subdivisions. Thank you.
Other speakers? Want to sum up, Councillor Turner?
We had a good meeting.
Let's call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
I'll put number 5 on this floor.
Speakers on 5. There are none. Let's call the question. And we're voting.
Councillor Huber? Closing the vote. And the motion carries 12-1.
Thank you, Chair. Very exciting report, as always. Councillor Zafman.
Just a point of clarification, I heard it read as 12-1. I just wanted to make sure that it was on record as an abstention, not a no vote.
Let's just get that on the record, since these meetings are videoed, although no one is expected to watch them.
My apologies, it's 12 with 1 recused. I was missing a counselor and didn't realize that a counselor had left the meeting, so.
Okay, let's keep moving then. So we'll move to added reports, 12th report of the council in closed session. Deputy Mayor Hubert, would you be so kind?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have one item to report, which is a lease extension at 220 Dundas Street, which houses our financial systems office. It is a procedural matter pursuant to Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001. The following recommendation be forwarded to council in closed session for the purpose of considering whether a recommendation should be forwarded to council for deliberation and a vote in public session. That on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services, and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, on the advice of the Manager of Realty Services, that the lease pending agreement as Schedule B between the City Corporation of the City of London and the Courthouse Block, Inc., for the lease of space on the 6th floor of 220 Dundas Street for a further 5-year term be approved.
Thank you very much.
And I'll move that.
Okay, that motion is up. There are no speakers. I will call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 13-0.
Okay, colleagues, let's move through the agenda. Deferred matters, there are none. Inquiries? None. Emergent motions? Emergent motion? Councillor Helmer?
Thank you. Colleagues would have seen a letter from Councillor Hopkins. It's on their table. Unfortunately, Councillor Hopkins is out of town and unable to be here today. As you'll see in the letter, I think it's clear why this is an emergent motion. I think the first step is to seek leave to introduce the motion.
Moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Usher. This is for leave only.
Councillor Ridley? Closing the vote, the motion carries 13-0.
So I'd like to introduce the substantive motion, which is to support Councillor Hopkins as she runs for a seat on the Board of Directors of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and to cover her expenses for that election up to $500. I just want to say, as I've served on a task force with AMO over the last little while, and I know Councillor Ridley did earlier for a different topic. A number of us have attended the association conferences every year. It's obviously an important organization. I think it'll be a very important organization over the next few years anyway. And I really support Councillor Hopkins running for a board position. I think it's really important that the City of London have somebody on the board of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, especially with the MOU that they have with the province and the way that they interact with the province. It's really important that we have somebody on the board, and I know Councillor Hopkins will do a good job.
The speakers, Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm seconding this motion. Most of you, all of you are quite aware that over the past 4 years I've been encouraging that we have a member on AMA's board. Unfortunately, AMA, you can only apply every 2 years, and this is the year that the election comes. And the important thing is that we get this done today. Normally it would not come through this process, but because of the fact that it has to get in the day before our next city council, we need to get it passed by this council, and that's one of the reasons why it's here as an emergent motion. I don't think it's a big deal to do it now. I think it's what I mean is that to not defer it. I think it's important that we get it done now, because I think it's important that we have somebody on the board. This is our opportunity. This is the year of the election, and I think that Councillor Hopkins would be a viable and very good candidate. So I urge you to support the motion. Thank you.
Other speakers? Let's call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 13-0.
Other emerging motions? There are none. Let's go to bylaws. Colleagues, we're going to deal with all of the bylaws with the exception of Bill 266, 267, and 281. We'll deal with 266, 267 together, and then 281 separately once we've done the remainder. So let's deal with all other bylaws. And that, colleagues, includes the two addeds that are on your desks, 283 and 284, I believe. Let me just confirm that. I've got 282 and 283. Just to confirm, there's only one added, 283. There is no 284. 282 was part of the original series of bills. Looking for mover for the first reading, Councillor Park, second by Councillor Usher. Call the question.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, the motion carries 13-0.
And second reading, moved by Councillor Turner. Moved by Councillor Turner, second by Councillor Zafman. Any speakers? We'll call the question. And we are voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 13-0.
Third reading, moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Turner. All those in favor, actually, let's just call the question. We're voting. Wait for it. Okay.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 13-0.
Okay, colleagues, let's do Bill 266 and 267. First reading, moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Mr. Park. Call the question. We are voting, first reading.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12 with 1 recused.
Second reading, moved by Councillor Zafman, seconded by Councillor Usher. Any speakers? We'll call the question. What, we're voting? Second? It's called preemptive voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12 with 1 recused.
I want to give this one to you, Councillor Usher. Moved by third reading, Councillor Usher, seconded by, thank you, Councillor Helmer. Call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12 with 1 recused.
Bill 281, moved by Councillor Zafman by a hair, seconded by Councillor Usher. Call the question.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-1.
Second reading, moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Speakers? No, no speakers. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-1.
Third reading, moved by Councillor Park, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Call the question.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12.
Colleagues, thank you for the great meeting. Let's look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Zafman. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Have a great night.